Good morning. Welcome to the OK Grognard Show. It's Sunday, May 17th, 2020, 9:37 a.m. Central in beautiful Lake Geneva, Wisconsin. We are spending some time today looking at David M. Prata's Advanced Dungeons & Dragons Initiative and Combat Table. If you haven't seen this, definitely do a quick search on Google at some point and get yourself a copy of it. It's readily available. I see we have Lexfire 22 in the chat. If you haven't followed the channel, you definitely ought to. As a follower of the Twitch channel, good morning. And speaking up in the chat during a live stream automatically puts you in for the drawing each week. This is week number 7. We've given away sets of dice in the past 6 weeks, but I'm afraid we're out of those now. What we do have are some OSR patches, some old school Renaissance patches from Thaddeus Moore. We've got 2 sets, so this week and next week we'll be giving out a set of these patches to one lucky person from the chat stream that is also a follower. I should mention that these are available and will be shipped freely to someone in the 48 contiguous states. If you're outside of that, you may need to chip in on shipping depending on where you are and how much it costs. If you actually are drawn as the giveaway winner, I'll contact you. We'll find out where you are. We'll figure out what it costs, and you can make a decision then. Certainly, if it's no more pricey than sending it somewhere in the 48 states, then I'll just cover it myself. No big deal. If it's more, you can decide whether it's worth it to pitch in. There are definitely some areas in the world where it could cost a fortune even to send something small, and it may be beyond, maybe cost prohibitive, and I'll leave it up to you. What we're doing today, though, as I said, is discussing this wonderful sort of flow chart. Last week we discussed this initiative. We discussed surprise, and we worked through this first couple of pages, and we ended just before we got into determining distances, so we'll start there this week. It is step 2. It is determine distance if unknown between the parties. So if there are obvious distances, like the group is stopped outside of a building 100 yards away and someone is coming out of the building, then 100 yards is 100 yards, and that's easy enough to determine without doing any sort of a random. But if you're outdoors, 6 to 24 inches is the base encounter, each of these being 10 yards outdoors in first edition, rather than each inch meaning 10 yards rather than 10 feet, which is an indoor measurement. So, and everything converts back and forth regarding to range and spell range and range combat, so really converts back and forth quite easily. If either party is surprised, subtract the larger number of surprise segments from the distance. So, if one party is surprised on a 1, one party is surprised on a 3, that's 2 segments difference, which would be 22 inches or 20 yards outdoors, 20 yards, 20 feet indoors. Terrain may further modify the encounter distance. That gets adjusted based on the type of terrain. So scrub, as you can see, is -1 on the die on all 3s and 4s. Forest, -1 on the die on all numbers. 0s are possible, so you could come out from behind a tree and be face to face with something. Marsh, -1 on all die, per die on all 2s, 3s, and 4s. So, on another day in another place, Lord Rabalar is wandering through the swamps to the northeast of his castle with an orcish hero. They are spotted, surprised on a roll of 1 by a group of lizard men. 6d4 are rolled to determine the encounter distance. Right, 6d4 as per base encounter distance. The results are 1, 1, 4, 4, and 1, and 3. So 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. These are adjusted because it gets adjusted per die on 3s and 4s. Wait. Let's double check that. In the swamps. -1 on 2s, 3s, and 4s. So 1, 1, 4, 4, 1, and 3 become 1, 1, 3, 3, 1, and 2. So 11 rather than 14. The surprise roll further reduces this total by -1. So the lizard men sight them at 10 inches or 100 yards. They'll keep their distance if they know what's good for them. Well, that may be true. They may not know what's good for them, what's happening in game. Narratively may make a difference if the lizard men have had run-ins with these individual heroes in the past and recognize them for who they are and have some sort of vendetta. They may choose not to keep their distance. So too, there'll be some decision on the part of the heroes, the players, through their characters to decide whether or not they want to close that distance. And that's where we are with an outdoor counter. Indoors, base encounter distance 5 inches to 10 inches. Remember, this is feet indoors, so it's 50 to 100. That's a d6 plus 4. This can change based on a number of factors. If this is unobstructed and light is involved, the distance possible for determination of another party present is virtually infinite. It could likewise be sharply restricted due to obstructions. So if we're in this huge, well-lit cavern, that can be one thing. If we're in a hallway, it could be another. Line of sight, very important. So, example, the lizard men did not know what was good for them. So now Rabalar, Queege, have to trudge down into their lair to exterminate the rest of them as they proceed along a 200-foot long entrance tunnel. They gleefully note the lizard men have been kind enough to light torches along its length, thus making surprise impossible. So, long hallway, well lit, you just got to see who's there. Noise can make a difference. If one party is making considerable noise, which is discernible to the other party, the latter will have the options of fleeing or concealment, the former negating the encounter, the latter allowing the distance to be 1 inch to 4 inch, 10 to 40 feet, before discovery by the noisy party. Example, Rabalar and Queege are congratulating each other on their fortune so loudly that they fail to notice the 10 lizard men sneaking up behind them. The lizard men have the option of fleeing undetected, but foolishly they close. D4. So they're saying 3 was rolled, right? So 3 inches or 30 feet before they are noticed. As we were talking about that huge cavern, well lit, so the actual area can make adjustments for that. If the encountered party is in a small area, distance between the two can be no greater than the maximum distance possible for discovery of one another in the area. Opening a door into a 20-foot by 20-foot room will mean the distance between the two parties under 10 feet, because obviously they're not two-dimensional and flat against the far wall, or thereabouts, or 20 feet, striking distance, 3 to 4, 10 feet, or 5 to 6, 20 feet. So you randomize based on the amount of distance available. After cleaning off their weapons, they make their way into a cave which measures roughly 30 feet across. According to D4, lizard men are in the cave area, 1 in striking distance, 10 feet away, 20 feet away, 30 feet away. On a roll of 1, shows they're in striking distance. So they may very well be right on the other side of the door, but that's not always the case. So DMs should resist the urge to automatically assume that a door that's open means whatever is in the subsequent area is directly behind the door. It's best to randomize these sorts of things to keep some variety in potential combats and possible encounters. You don't want a game to become boring where every encounter is an encounter of immediacy. Planned or unplanned appearance is another factor. The sudden precipitation of one party upon another due to any number of factors, teleportation, dimension door, other magical means, a shoot, etc., will cause distance similar to that found when actual area is a factor. So, if you drop down a chute into a 10 by 10 room and there's something there, well, you're going to be in striking distance. If you drop down a chute to a large cavern, something could be as far away as the maximum distance away from the chute landing. So you need to randomize that distance and the potential encounter. Surprise, of course, makes a difference. Surprise can only be a factor in close encounter situations. If either or both parties are surprised, the distance must be either 1 inch to 3 inches, 10 to 30 feet. This is still indoors, right? Or it must be less as determined under the actual area modifier. Thus, if the actual area is a 40 by 60 room, a surprise exists, the distance between the two parties will be 1 to 3 inches. The example they give in the next cave, Rabalar and Queed surprise another group of lizard men. Counter distance would normally be 10 to 30 feet, but since the cave is only 20 feet wide, 2 inches the maximum distance possible. And then, of course, light makes a difference. The illumination factor or visual capability of the concerned parties will affect encounter distance as follows. A light source reliance limits the encounter distance to twice the normal vision radius of the source, 2 times radius of the light source. Infravision and or quote-unquote ultravision can operate only to the stated limit of the range and limit encounter distance accordingly. In the last tunnel, which is dark, Rabalar uses his longsword +3 for light. It sheds light in a 20-foot radius, so the maximum distance for any encounter is 40 feet. If Queege looks up ahead with his infravision, though, then the maximum encounter will be 60 feet. So I think this is incorrect in that if it sheds light in a 20-foot radius, the maximum distance of the encounter is not 40 feet because it's really only 20 feet. It's to the outside of the radius, not from one end of the radius to the other, since the radius is around the sword. And the sword is being held by the hero. So that should actually read 20 feet there. But again, if that light source is extinguished, Queej, who has infravision, has a chance of making the encounter up to 60-foot distance. So there we go on that. Both parties declare their intentions. So this is step 3. And we can cover this part 3 as well today, since we have some time. Both parties declare their intentions. So intentions is something I've noticed in some pickup games, conventions, and whatnot. Not all DMs go through the step of declaring intentions. Some DMs narrow what intentions need to be declared to speed things up with larger groups. I know that myself, I require spellcasters to declare if they're casting spells, although I don't require them to reveal what spells they might be preparing. At the outset, I trust them to do so because within the actual play of the game, I think it's a little more fun to keep that sort of thing as through an honor system as the purview of the caster. So rather than have all the cards on the table up front, it's enough to know that they are playing cards, and they can keep them face down until we get to that point where it makes a difference. But in this situation, step 3, both parties declare their intentions. A, the DM should mentally note what actions the monsters plan to take, which I always do, prior to knowing what the PCs will do, and I always have that set in advance, and I'm not a DM who's going to take advantage of that foreknowledge to ruin or nerf any player's actions or plans. Let them have their wins. If they make a good plan and they outplan the monsters in a particular case, let them win. There are more encounters. The DM doesn't need to win. The DM has every monster in the world, and if they want to win, they can have them all attack at once, and it's game over for whatever player characters happen to be there, no matter how high level they are. Sooner or later, if a DM is trying to win and being adversarial, that's going to happen. So the DM mentally notes what actions the monsters plan to take prior to knowing what the PCs will do. Very important. For newer DMs, you got to resist the urge to try and be adversarial. B, each player should describe what his character will do. Spellcasters must note what spell they intend to cast at the beginning of each round. I want them to think about that, decide, but then just let me know they're casting. That's enough for me when I run the games. But if you want to go by the book, they should be declaring or making a note, which is fine, what spells they intend to cast. 2, other intentions may be declared in a more general manner. I attack with my sword, I fire with my bow. That is, they aren't required by the rules to necessarily declare a target at that stage. 3, any delay on the part of the player to declare intentions should be considered as a like delay in the character's action on a 6-second to 1 segment basis. The example they give, decisions. Poor Otto cannot decide whether to cast his irresistible dance or Geas on the evil cleric. After about 20 seconds of hemming and hawing, he finally decides to go with the dance. The DM rules that the spell will go off 3 segments later than usual, in segment 8 instead of segment 5. Well, that's fair enough. But, and it's by the rules, that the DM can adjudicate that the hemming and hawing is happening in-game as well as at the table. And I can understand why some games are run this way. It keeps a pace to the game. It keeps the players involved and on their toes so that they're not, but they're not taking overly more time than they should have to make decisions. But let's face it, the players themselves don't actually live in the skin of these characters 24/7. A character, theoretically, can be smarter than the player or dumber. So unless you want to figure all of that into this adjudication, then you're probably not being totally fair if you adjudicate too harshly against the players in situations like this. And let's face it, there are some players who are newer to the game that'll take a little longer to make certain decisions, and while you can press them to stick with it, you shouldn't be overly harsh when adjudicating such like this. If a player perhaps has a stammer, um, is it fair to hold that against their character? I don't think so. So there are mitigating factors that should be taken into consideration when adjudicating these things. And obviously, you want to do it on a player-by-player basis. If you've got one super experienced player who doesn't have any of these mitigating factors that might be holding them up and they're just stalling, they're hoping to get more information, or they're goofing around on their phone, checking for messages and sloughing you off, nah, go ahead, adjudicate harshly. They need to be staying in the game. They need to be keeping their head in it. They need to be playing and not holding it up, because it's not that you're taking it out on this one player. It's that you're trying to keep them from taking their gameplay out on the rest of the players at the table. Part of a DM's job is to make sure that everybody's having fun, and if you've got one player who's making it less fun for everyone else because they're stalling or not keeping their head in the game, then you've got to take some action to urge them to be a little more efficient and a little more conscious of the other players at the table and their fun. So it never hurts to adjudicate harshly in situations like this, when it will make sure that players are not creating a situation where other players' fun is in jeopardy because of their actions. Pre-initiative, step 4. Pre-initiative actions are resolved. A bow specialist who begins the round with an arrow nocked, shaft drawn, target in sight is entitled to loose that arrow prior to any initiative check. So we've only rolled surprise at this point, and we've figured out where everybody falls in the pecking order, and we've declared our actions, and we're saying that the bow specialist, let's say it's a ranger, say it's an elf with a bow, and they've expressed earlier in the game, in the session before this potential encounter, that they had their bow out and that they have an arrow ready, and as soon as they do see a target, then this example, Erag eyed his elven companion skeptically. Specialist. Bah, in my day, we didn't have no stinking specialists. All weapons did the same amount of damage. You either knew how to use it or you didn't. Just then, a group of gnolls rounded a bend up ahead. Neither side was surprised, but the elf had an arrow knocked and readied and loosed it before Ereg even knew what was happening. To Ereg's astonishment, the elf fired 2 more arrows thereafter, hitting and killing 3 gnolls. Gee, I only got 2 with my sword. Tell me about this specialization thing again? B. Crossbow specialist who begins the round with a crossbow cocked and aimed and a target in range also gets a free shot before initiative is rolled. C. Any other exceptional actions that occur prior to initiative should be resolved. So all of these 3 things can happen before we're even rolling initiative as part of a surprise round. 5. Resolve psionic combat on a segment-by-segment basis. Now, I'm going to tell you that psionics is not something I use in my games. It's never been something I've used. It's a neat little system, but in my style of setting and gameplay, it's more akin to something like the Force in science fantasy games, science fiction games, or akin to something an elder horror might do in a horror game, and those are not the style of games I play. So I'll just read through this with the stipulation that it's not something I use, so I'm not going to get too deep into how one might adjudicate it, since I don't have that experience. 5. Resolve psionic combat on a segment-by-segment basis. Compare each psionic's chosen attack mode to his opponent's chosen defense mode. All attacks and defenses are simultaneous. B. Adjust attack and defense strength totals to reflect that segment. Just double checking something here. Adjust attack and defense strength totals to reflect that segment's expenditures as well as any points lost due to attack. C. Repeat steps A and B until the psionic combat is ended. One or both psionics are affected by a more mundane attack form during the round, or 10 segments have passed. So that's pretty straightforward. You run through that, and if there's something that from the outside, whether it's a sword to the gut or an arrow to the face or a spell fire that pops off and does something to disrupt all of these psionics, then you just let the psionics play out as a sort of a side thing that's simultaneous to the rest of the rounds, the rest of the segments in the round. 6. Determine initiative for the round by rolling a d6 for each side. The higher of the 2 rolls is said to possess the initiative for that melee round. Something I do at the table prior to actually getting into any kind of combat is to determine, quote unquote, who is in the box. Which player will be rolling initiative for that side. I roll 6-sider for the creatures, the opponents, whatever, and one of the players gets to roll a 6-sider for their group. And prior to that happening, I ask everybody to roll a 20-sider to determine who's going to be that person. Whoever rolls highest is going to be that person. If there's a tie, those people that are tied roll off, and whoever wins that is that person who is in the box. When that person is in the box, they are rolling a d6 for initiative for the players, and they continue to be in the box for as long as they do not lose an initiative. If they win initiative, they stay in the box. If they tie, they stay in the box. As soon as they lose initiative, the next time initiative needs to be rolled, I go clockwise around the table to the next player, and that player is then in the box and continues to be in the box until they lose an initiative roll. And it keeps going clockwise around the table. Just a little side thing I do. It's not something that is in the rules, but you have to figure out who's rolling for that side, or the DM can roll. But I prefer one of the players rolls it. So determine initiative for the round by rolling a d6 for each side. The higher of the two rolls is said to possess initiative for that round. A. Each participant does not make a separate initiative roll. However, the dexterity attacking adjustment is added or subtracted to the initiative roll for each missile firing combatant on an individual basis. Initiative bonuses do not apply to characters carrying more than light gear. Initiative penalties always apply. B. One exceptional monster, the spectator, rolls a d8 for initiative rather than a d6. There's an example here. Lehman faces off against the spectators beneath Bone Hill, classic adventure. The spectator scores a 5 on a d8 for initiative. Poor Lehman can only roll a d6, but he too manages to roll a 5, a tie. However, since Lehman is throwing his dagger plus 2, he is able to add his reaction bonus to the die roll. His 16 dexterity gives him a plus 1, so his 5 becomes a 6, and he wins initiative. Just him, though. Anybody else who's part of Lehman's party, unless they have a dexterity attacking adjustment, and unless they're applying it to missile fire, and unless they are carrying light gear or less, they do not get that extra bonus, as we just saw above. C. Certain magic items, notably the crossbow of speed, short sword of quickness, scimitar of speed, allow a wielder first strike regardless of initiative result. So those are all important things to keep in mind when you've got initiative going. Well, I'll tell you what. We are about a half hour in. We're moving on to 7. And this section, as you can see from a quick scroll down here, goes on for quite a few pages and is rather involved. So what I'm going to suggest is that we end it here before we get into section 7, page 6, and we pick it up next Sunday from this point, and that is what we will do. So, for the rest of the day, once again, we talked about tomorrow being the announcement for week 7 last week. One of these sets of patches will go to a giveaway winner, and week 8, a week from tomorrow, 8 days away, the other set will go out to another winner. I want to remind people that Con of Champions is coming up next weekend, or this coming weekend actually. Saturday, Sunday, and Monday. It's holiday weekend, so they're spreading it out over 3 days, over Saturday, Sunday, and Monday, rather than a Friday, Saturday, Sunday type of thing. I'm running a bunch of first edition games, some first level, some third level, some fifth level. I believe they're all full, but you could jump on the waiting list. We don't know what the world will hold in store for people. It may be that we have some people drop and we'll have to add somebody in. Thanks, Lex Fire, very much. He says, have a good week. He or she, not sure. Have a good week. Good luck at the con. Thanks. Lex Fire, what's your first name? I can put it down on the drawing list in case you win next week. I'll have a first name already at the ready. George. Thank you, George. Thank you very much. Is this hard charging George by any chance, or is this someone else? While I wait for that answer, I'll just dive into the schedule for the rest of the week here. Don't forget. Take care. No? Okay. Well, thank you, George, very much. Rest of the week, we'll be looking at tomorrow, the weekly news and giveaway. Tuesday, cartography and world building. I'm still putting a few things together for next weekend, and we'll discuss some of that. Campaign discussion, mostly Grimwald, my own campaign, on Wednesdays. Thursday, crafting and painting. We'll catch up with how I've been doing with the catapult painting and look at what we'll be doing for our next project after that. On Friday, virtual tabletop adventure building. I use Roll20 myself, so that is our basis for building virtual tabletop adventures, though I'm sure the advice can work with just about any virtual tabletop. Saturday, DM cartoon reviews. We've been looking at the D&D animated series. We've gone through episode 8. Episode 9 finishes the first disc of 3, since there's 27 episodes from the original D&D animated series. We'll do 9, and then the following week we'll move on. We'll jump over to, I think we'll be jumping over to the Adventures of Conan, first season animated series. These are reviews of these cartoons from a DM perspective, so we're looking at what kind of stuff can we grab from them and possibly use in an adventure for ourselves. And again, back to Sunday for more of the rules retrospective. You'll note that if you're on the if you're in the Twitch stream, definitely please do follow the stream and speak up in the chat to be automatically added into the giveaway each week. I thank you too if you're watching this on YouTube. Please do subscribe to the channel and like or dislike if you feel that's important. Individual videos that you're watching, I appreciate your support. I thank you, and have a good week.